Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson, and I've asked Duncan Craib. He's the Managing Director and CEO of Boss Energy. ASX code is BOE. Now, Duncan has been around in this industry for a long time, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Look at how young he looks, but he's had a lot of experience in uranium. So I think there's people out there that potentially don't fully understand the macro market, what's going on. And in fact, some people say it's uranium, it's never going to get into a sort of a mainstream energy. But listen, we've got to sit up and take notice at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, because the energy crisis hasn't gone away. And if anything, it is going to get even more critical as we go forward, especially with price caps on the gas industry, the war in Ukraine. There's so many different factors. But the one fact remains, we will need more and more energy as we head into the next decade. And right now, I see uranium as zero carbon emissions, very clean energy. I think it's got a bright future. Duncan, great to see you. Welcome back to Small Caps.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Well, Duncan, it's always great to hear from you because it's not just, you are the Managing Director and CEO of Boss Energy, as I said in the intro. We will talk about the Honeymoon project and what you're doing there. But before we do, I thought it'd be great if you could give your views on the macro market and how you see and why you see uranium as being a potential, a significant opportunity in the energy space.
Great, thanks, Kerry. I actually flew home on Wednesday night, having spent the last sort of 10 days on Honeymoon site inducting new senior management. So, really look forward to sharing with you what developments are taking place on the mine. But on the way home on the plane, I sort of tried to chronologically sort of share thoughts on the market because there's significant noise out there. There's a lot of mainstream media, etc. It's just building and building with uranium and nuclear, and I think that's just fantastic. So tried to sort of summarize thoughts as sort of best I can. But really, I think the key message here is that governments worldwide now are setting targets for achieving net zero carbon emissions, and it's sort of being enacted in policy. So we're seeing that like in countries such as the UK, the US, or Europe, such as France, even Germany, extending the life cycle of their nuclear power plants. But it's being recognised as policy, and that's essential to achieve those net zero carbon emissions. So I think that's the first sort of key point to make. So demand for uranium as a result in the near, mid and long term is really growing. So even before Russia invaded Ukraine, that new supply was needed. So for years, the industry has been saying by 2022, 23, 24, new supply was required. But that invasion of Ukraine has just highlighted further the need for sort of energy security as a priority. And as a result, support for nuclear has increased. In parallel, you've got geopolitical tensions creating that sort of de-globalization within the fuel markets. So what we're finding now is that, there's sort of around the world, particularly Western fuel buyers are placing less reliance on material coming out of Russia and Kazakhstan because they may be vulnerable to supply shock with Russian ports. So all that sort of leads to Western fuel buyers then looking to increase or encouraging suppliers in Western markets or Western countries to increase capacity to meet that demand. So when you think about it as well, prior to the invasion, and the invasion is a key point, markets had expressed discipline, reducing capacity. In some cases, there were uranium mines purchasing inventory to supply contracts and reducing that overhang. Last night, Yellowcake announced they had purchased 1.5 million pounds from Kazatomprom, Yellowcake being like a physical commodity trust, similar to the Sprott. But it's another indication of taking physical uranium away from the market, so no longer for sale for fuel buyers, which gives rise or tension to the uranium price. So then you take it with the deglobalization of Western market, supplies in deficit. It takes years to get a uranium mine up and running, and hence that's why there's a slow move away from Russia. Why has the US imposed, or Europe, I should say, or NATO imposed sanctions against Russia on a whole range of commodities, yet they haven't on uranium. It's a possibility, and it keeps getting flagged, particularly in the US press, and that may happen. But the reasoning for that slow breakaway from Russia in uranium is because of the dependency upon it. But that's the encouragement to build up Western supply. So I guess with the emphasis on security of supply, those fuel buyers in Western countries are now looking worldwide for where can they identify other sources of uranium from geopolitical friendly countries, such that, and at a corporate level. And that's where Boss Energy comes to the surface. You know, we really are a very attractive mine in that regard. And then when you sort of reflect on how Boss Energy sits alongside its peers, our peers are also experiencing, existing producers, inflationary pressures, supply chain issues, which is a legacy of that COVID-19 pandemic that we've recently gone through, higher costs, lower production. The pressures are then magnified more for developers and new projects that are yet to complete feasibility studies or get government approvals that meet that higher capital needs in a case of rising interest rates. So it's really, this is where restart projects, again, such as Honeymoon, come into their own because they're largely built. We're just increasing the technical capabilities. So I guess when you look at it, then on the market, going back to it, the current sort of, you can kind of say, why is the spot price then hovering around 50, 51 US a pound at the moment? Why then a company share price is sort of at these levels and not reflective of that fundamentals in the sector that I'm mentioning? And that, in a sense, is also delaying further investment in new projects and capital, or raising capital to meet the borrowing needs of companies. So that's then forcing the new developers to say, gosh, can we equity fund? Well, that's getting harder. Do we want to lock in debt? Well, that's also hard, because if we lock in debt, you've got to underpin that with offtake agreements. And right now, locking in offtake agreements at that 50 US a pound mark isn't advantageous. So it's a really, all these aspects are coming into play. It's a fascinating time. I think, you know, meanwhile, that buffer of inventory in the industry has decreased. You've got the sequestering of uranium by the Sprott Commodity Trust. You've got, you know, utilities are now coming out. Look how much Cameco signed up last year in long-term offtake agreement. You know, it's all these factors are pointing to a big near midterm deficit in supply, which will lead to higher prices. And that's where Boss Energy is posed with that first mover advantage. So really, there are enough uranium resources in the world to meet the demand, no doubt. Particularly in Australia, we've got about a third of the world's suppliers, you know, sort of wearing that hat, chairing the MCA Uranium Forum, keep banging on about. But the reality is, to develop those other resources, you need higher uranium prices to incentivize that development. Again, restart projects such as ourselves, we've got a low all-in cost, so we can be competitive now and get those first wins. But there's more uranium, we need higher prices to actually capitalize upon that. So really, our first mover advantage, when we're asked why now, why not wait, is because we see near-term deficit. We see, and I've experienced it, how long it is to get, you know, cut through the red tape to get projects up and running, particularly for uranium, where it's the most regulated industry or mining industry in Australia, for example. But we can sell into that market. We can generate cash, strategize, become a bigger player through exploration, M&A, but really, and funding acquisitions. And that's our strategy. So it's kind of, the market's been one driven from the price of excess inventory to now sort of increasing production. We're ready. You know, and I think when you listen, like interviews today, or your listeners listen to other uranium companies or presentations, and I deeply respect all our colleagues and contemporaries, but ask yourselves the following questions. I mean, really focus on where are the proven projects? You know, there's a lot of regurgitated resources coming up in the mines. There's a lot of new entrants onto the stock exchanges. What assets do they have? Many were there in the last cycle. They never went into economic sort of production. What jurisdictions are they located in? Is it a uranium-friendly jurisdiction? Go one step further. Do those uranium-friendly jurisdictions have the infrastructure to support the water, the power, the basic needs for any mining project? Where are the experienced people? Have those companies been able to attract, uranium expertise? Because the last 10 years with the commodity in the doldrum, a lot of that talent's been taken out of the industry and pulled into whether it be gold or nickel or other projects. They couldn't sit around waiting for uranium to turn. It's taken 10 years really for these prices to get back to where they are. How easy is it to get permitted? Do you have state, federal government support? Do you have community support? The permitting. And then ultimately, where is that supply going to come from? Where are the fuel buyers looking? And we've got a long way to go, and I'm not saying it's a banked thing that we have with Honeymoon, but I kind of feel that we've ticked those boxes, and we went into this project really with that in mind. Can we, those core elements, can we address them? And that's sort of where I think we stand. So it's challenging, but that's Kerry, I think hopefully that tried to describe it quite well, just basically the steps and why we are doing and positioning ourselves the way we are.
I think you also made some very, very important points there, Duncan. One is people need to ask themselves some pretty important questions before they leap into just any old projects. And there was a lot of them there. Where are the proven projects, the jurisdiction? Now, I want to pick you up on that before I get into fuel buyers, which is Australia. The hysteria a couple of weeks ago, literally, when I think it was a fuel waste cell went off the back of a truck in Western Australia. Seriously, everybody went, like mainstream media went into hyperdrive, and it was like, shut the gates, we're all going to, I just love your commentary on that. Was that just a case of
it was certainly, it gained international attention.
I know.
Yeah, that was something. And it does, it's an educational piece, really, to educate our Australian society. I think that with the Australian Navy adopting sort of nuclear submarines, that educational piece is going to become more mainstream. And certainly from the feedback I've got from public and government, everyone's supportive of the way the Navy is heading in that direction, which shows more public acceptance. But yeah, it did generate a lot of news. And I do wonder sometimes if it newspapers have to sell newspapers.
My question is, was it over hysteria?
Yeah, I think so. But the takeaway I took from it is Australia had the expertise and technical know-how to find what's smaller than a tiny battery in the middle of the Pilbara, middle of the outback. They found it. That in itself is the story.
Yeah.
We possess the technical expertise and know-how to really pursue nuclear. And I think that was a wonderful piece. And I wish there was more hysteria over that aspect, to how capable we are. And why are we the only G20 country not pursuing nuclear? Why doesn't the government, have an open debate about this issue? But yeah, don't get me drawn down there. I could talk for hours.
Well, I actually was going to ask you very quickly about that. Do you think there will come a time when Australia wakes up? Because are we the second largest supplier?
Third largest reserves. I do. I feel absolutely. And I fundamentally believe it's part of the solution. So alongside wind or solar, other renewable projects, but why not? Why you've got this whole resource, and if we're weaning ourselves off fossil fuels, there's an industry of uranium mining that could easily transition that workforce, and we focus on that other resource that we have. So, yeah, South Australia is leading the way. In Australia, they're supportive. Why can't the rest
South Australia
follow suit? Why not? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for people to realise is that France's energy is, I think, over 70% is from nuclear, and they have small modular reactors, which, ladies and gentlemen, you wouldn't even know if you passed it on the road that it was an SMR, would you?
Absolutely, and the UK has been drawing down on French nuclear power to get through its winter. France is, France's economy, significant reasoning why it survived through so well through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today is it's had nuclear power.
Yeah. Well, let's hope the conversation changes with wonderful people like you that can help. Every time you and I speak, I want to start with a little educational piece, because I think people need to stop being terrified and start realizing that this is a very useful piece of the energy jigsaw puzzle. But what involvement, Duncan, getting more specifically back to you, what involvement have you had with fuel buyers in the most recent times?
I think it's picking up. I think the market really is picking up. The level of interest is rising, which is, particularly encouraging. My colleague, Sashi Davies, is attending quite a few conferences now and meeting with fuel buyers around the world. And it's really, Honeymoon's on their radar, which is terrific. So in March, we have 2 visitations by 2 big utilities, really to meet with me and also to do due diligence on the Honeymoon site, which is a good precursor. And I think that's fabulous. So it really is a good sign of the market at the moment. So yeah, really encouraging, really pleasing to see that level of interest increase. And I think it's going to keep going. We're often invited for these requests for proposals or the tendering process. We're being very disciplined in what we're putting forward. We don't feel that we're in a rush, and the reasoning for that is that we don't have any debt. We are fully funded to build the mine, and we have our physical uranium worth nearly $100 million in reserve. So we're in a good position not to feel that we're forced to enter into contracts right now. So yeah, it's from where I'm sitting. I think hopefully it continues, but I think we've played our cards pretty well until now.
I want to go a little bit into the numbers, if you like. You mentioned the actual physical uranium that you bought, which you said is valued at 100 mil. A little bit controversial at the time. What did it cost you? What did it cost the company at the time?
We purchased that material at 30.15 US per pound. So I can't recall. It was roughly around $52 million. It's now around 92, thereabouts. So yeah, it was there not only as we're long uranium, but it was also as a means to provide that working capital support during a ramp-up period and allay or give confidence to the fuel buyers that if there is a hiccup during ramp-up, I mean, any mine, it's not turn a switch and boom, it works. There is teething issues that we're going to have to work through, no doubt. And we recognise that. Our job is really to meet those challenges very quickly and expedite anything that rises. But if that happens, you've always got a reserve to supply the inventory. So it gives you the negotiating power as if you were an existing producer.
You said no debt, you're funded into production. When are you going to come into production? Because that means production means sales means revenue means cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still on track for Q4 this year, 2023. Time's coming up. It feels like it's not that far away. And that was what was so pleasing on site these last 10 days. I mean, just the vibe of the spirit of the workforce. I mean, everyone's really pumped. They're engaged. They're excited. They realise there's a job to do. We can't afford any slip-ups on our schedule, but they're very disciplined. And I keep saying to our colleagues, swim in your lane, focus on what you need to do. Don't worry about what's happening over there. If we all start worrying about other areas, then nothing will happen. So stay in your lane, focus on what you need to do, and we'll get there. And everyone's rising to that. So it's even having a coffee at the Silly Goat Cafe in Broken Hill yesterday. I was sitting next to some local coppers, the police, and they just said, the town really is looking forward to Honeymoon starting up, and it would be great for the town and good for employment. So there's just a positive vibe around this company, which is terrific.
How far is it from Broken Hill? One of my favourite towns.
Yeah, it's about 75 kilometres as the crow flies, northwest. It's probably about an hour and a half drive, I'd say, thereabouts. Yeah.
All right. So we've spoken about the macro market. What do you need to, and you said you're getting into production Q4, fingers crossed this year, ladies and gentlemen. And if I'm already talking to Duncan in February, it seems like Christmas was yesterday. Q4 is going to be tomorrow. What needs to be done to get you into production? How much more work? Do you need more?
The work starts now. So to mitigate sort of logistical issues, we set about really procuring the items that we need first and get them delivered to site, then start the actual construction and erection of that material. So when you break down what we're doing is we're increasing the size of the water treatment plant to really get rid of the salt content through the groundwater that we have, almost like a desal plant. So then you've got cleaner fluid going into your leaching solution for the well field. We're adding on two new we're adding on the ion exchange circuit, which is basically 2 trains or 6 columns, which is what's the game changer for this project. Ion exchange accounts for 60% of the world's supply of uranium, used throughout extensively Kazakhstan, Wyoming in the US, for example, but that's allowed us to bring down our costs and increase production. We're adding 2 new high temperature kilns so we can produce uranium at a higher heat, which provides the more dense U3O8. A lot of mines produce UF04, so U3O8 is what the customer and conversion facilities want. And really introducing new modern techniques to the well field. So well fields where the current focus is on, that first flushing is sort of just over or nearly under 3 months' time from now. But yeah, we're going very strongly there. We're nearly 50% through that well field construction, which then needs the water treatment plant. The gypsum ponds are being built. But I mean, where else are we? So in terms of expenditure, half of our committed expenditure is committed. So which was a recent announcement, I think early last week on the ASX, might have been the week before, but really to show that we've committed half of our expenditure is committed within budget. So no budget overrun, and that in itself is really really fortuitous. So really pleased with that aspect, and then you look at people. People-wise, we've recruited all our management and senior management other than the processing superintendent. So that in itself is terrific because from their perspective, they're now reaching into industry to pick up colleagues to support their various departments. So it's challenging environment, no doubt. But we so far we're tracking along, but all hands on deck. And if we keep going this way, we'll meet our production schedule for the end of the year.
Are people on site? Do you have a camp on site, or are they all coming in?
Oh no, absolutely, we do. We've refurbished the camp on site, so that can house up to 80 people at the moment. There's a second quadrant that's legacy name of Melrose Place that we'll look to also refurbish. But yeah, and then we have sort of base contractors coming in from local community, etc., as and where we need it. So you rely on your own labour, but there are also workforce or external labour that you'll need from time to time. But it doesn't really validate having those additional headcount full time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. You mentioned spot price before, 50, 51 currently. Can you sell into that market, or does that spot price need to be a bit strong? Well, clearly, if it was double, fantastic. But give us some numbers around what works for you.
Yeah, so our all-in cost is around 32 US per pound in our last feasibility study. No doubt that would have risen.
Yeah.
But at 50, you would be profitable at the moment. So yeah, it's a good question. We believe the price is going to rise. So what we want to do is be there at the beginning stages of the market such that you lock in contracts with really strong counterparties, which the strategic fuel buyers, so when I mean strategic, they're the big, well-funded fuel buyers. So number of the bigger utilities in the United States, for example, are owned by the US government. I mean, what better counterparty could you have?
Absolutely.
So they're the ones that typically come out first. And that's who you ideally want to trade with. And, so So we want to be there. We want to be there at the beginning of the market. And as tried to before in the beginning of the presentation, we believe that once the market does rise and the incentivized price rises, other development projects that aren't there yet, anywhere close to being able to make a final investment decision, they will also be in the marketplace competing for contracts. So then it becomes, a bit of a frenzy of winning contracts. But right now, clear advantage that we want to capitalize on that a restart project can do.
Well, it sounds to me like you are in the driving seat. We're running out of time, Duncan. I can't believe it. Every time I speak to you, the time goes too fast, like the world spins too fast. Let's wrap it up. Great investment audience out there that listens to our interviews on small caps. If you could just let us know why you think now, with this restart project at Honeymoon, and I guess the macro outlook for uranium, why do you think now is a great time for them to be sitting up and taking notice of Boss Energy?
Thanks, Kerry. I mean, really, the demand for uranium is growing, and it's going to grow in the near, mid, and long term. So it's a fascinating time in our market and one to really get ready for. We have also committed half our expenditure. So half of that 113 million CapEx spend is committed, and we've committed that within budget, which is a terrific outcome. So, and thirdly, I guess, we keep tracking this way. We are on track to produce by Q4 2023. So all going well.
All going well. Q4 2023. I'm sure we'll be talking to Duncan again before that time. But the other thing to remember, ladies and gentlemen, no debt.
No debt.
No debt. As they come into production at the end of the year, we'll be chatting to Duncan once again. But thanks so much for joining me on Small Caps today.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Thank you.